Hi, my name is Joe Jackson. I'm a journalist, author, interviewer and broadcaster. And what you're about to hear is one of the roughly 1,400 interviews I did for publications such as the Irish Times, Sunday Independent, Hot Press Magazine and for RT Radio 1. How do I know there are roughly 1,400 interviews? Because I recently digitized all the damn tapes myself. But remember that many of the interviews were done for the print media and recorded on cassette tapes. So some are, let's say, sonically challenged. However, I happen to believe that sonic considerations should at times give way to historical significance. And I'm glad to say that at least some powers that be in RT Radio 1 agreed with me on this, and broadcast between 2015 and 2018 many of my interviews in a series called The Joe Jackson Tapes Revisited. What follows is a programme from that series. By the way, if you want to access the full tapes for personal or professional use, for example in a documentary, you can contact me via my website, joejacksoninterviewer.com. Enjoy the podcast. Hi, welcome to this edition of The Joe Jackson Tapes Revisited. But first let me say this, sometimes when I revisit tapes I made over a roughly 30-year period as a so-called celebrity interviewer, I am left speechless. That's me speechless. More seriously, the truth is that when I played after not hearing for 21 years the 4 hours of tape I made in 1996 with Father Brian Darcy for a Hot Press interview, I was startled by how truly soul-searching he had been. Far more so, in fact, than I had space to allow him to be in the published interview. This was particularly true in terms of the last cassette tape we made, actually here in RTE, in a relatively quiet corner before Darcy was due to do a guest slot on a radio show. That tape really does sound like he was making his first, if not last, confession, and could just as well be a near monologue from Beckett's Waiting for Godot. By the way, Father Brian Darcy in his 2006 book, A Different Journey, said that during this interview I became the first journalist to ask him outright if he himself had ever been sexually abused. You'll hear that exchange, but what you won't hear is Darcy telling me the details of each incident of abuse, the first of which occurred when he was a boy, the second when he was a seminarian. That part of the interview was off the record and not on tape, though Darcy did give me permission to leave in at least the reference to the fact that he had been abused. Tellingly, one reason he was reticent to go public in more detail on this subject was that his image as Father Trendy might lead to some people saying he was just jumping on the bandwagon at a time when tales of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church were rife. Hearing Darcy tell me this made me even more determined to try and undo his ridiculously reductive image as Father Trendy, something that already was my goal. So to kick off, I purposefully, provocatively said to Brian that this image probably struck many young people in particular as not only patronising, but also alienating, if not pretty abominable.
I was never that keen that I was a Father Trendy. To be honest with you. And those who know me are and there are quite a number of people who would know me, would be very good friends. People who worked hard with me in parishes, in spiritual programs, in all the other sort of stuff, would know that I was never, ever a Father Trendy. Secondly,
but what does that phrase connote to you?
Father Trendy means that he's jumping on every bandwagon, and that he I mean, for example, that you were on like talking about songs and stuff like that. I never did an outlaw of any description, ever.
Okay, but you made the entertainment industry your ministry.
That is because I was a fan of the industry, not because it was a ministry. I wasn't mixing the two in that other sense.
But were you trying to bring the people back to God through music? You know, like Dolly Parton might claim they do in country music. They have another agenda. That's what I think some people fear.
No, I don't. I mean, there was a stage when I most certainly did feel that pop music was saying something that I listened to a lot, and maybe was saying something that I could preach a lot, and particularly from the times of Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel. And it was reflecting what young people were thinking, and it was not necessarily the same message as the church was saying at the same time. And certainly it was bringing up women's issues, and it was bringing up abortion, and it was
like who? Paul Simon, singer-songwriters.
Singer-songwriters throughout the you know, Helen Reddy was bringing up a lot of stuff later on in that stage about women's issues.
Well, I Am Woman, and
precisely that sort of stuff.
Feminist anthem.
And it moves through it. I mean, and Dolly Parton and to a greater extent, Loretta Lynn was too.
But Dolly Parton was too.
For their own place. Yes, Dolly Parton.
Those songs about young women abandoned because they became pregnant. They were very forward-looking. Did you ever get in trouble for the fact that some of those songs were definitely espousing an ethos or a cause that were different than the churches?
I give you a straightforward example of it, Joe. The first time I became editor of The Cross was a couple of months after I was ordained. And the first issue of The Cross for November 1970, front cover of The Cross was the Beatles and their influence on young people. And it was banned by the censor. The censor in the Archbishop did not want that to be on the front cover of a religious magazine. And if you go back, it was on every single paper at that stage that a religious magazine would dare to put the Beatles on it. And that was what I did my
Who
first
wrote the article? Was that your article?
I did.
And what were you saying, that it had influenced them in terms of drugs?
Yes, I was more popular than Jesus' ethos.
You carried through that line?
I was saying that, and I said to a great extent that was a true statement.
All right, well, I can understand why that was. Poor old John nearly got burned in Memphis for that one.
So you're bringing that one. I think what the guy said was true. He wasn't claiming to be greater than Jesus. What he was saying was, I probably am better known than Jesus Christ throughout the earth. And that is probably, maybe, I don't know, but it certainly had a deeper ring of truth in it.
Well, one incident, before you go forward on that, there is a book that's just come out called Revolution in the Head about the Beatles. And it roots the success of groups like the Beatles. It takes very seriously that comment. And it says that the popularity of groups like the Beatles, forward through to Presley, to Prince, to Jackson, that all these people are almost substitute gods in an age where science has atomized the idea of Christ.
I would buy that. I would buy that as a very good political, or not as a very good philosophy that could be held. That's all I'm saying. You would argue and disagree or agree with it
as to whether those people should be seen in those terms,
and exactly, or what they would even think of it, or whether you can bring it to its logical conclusion. There is an element of truth which not necessarily is a full truth.
Right, but you did say that the reference I said to you where Elvis changed Pink Cadillac, you may have religion to Pink Cadillac, you saw rock and roll becoming a new religion. And there are many who see it in those and sell it in those terms.
Maybe so. I would say it may be a new liturgy rather than a new religion.
Okay.
I'm not
fair enough, but define the difference for me.
I think it's where people come together. Liturgy is where people come together and get in touch with, because they're in a communal experience, get in touch with the greater power. Now that's really the advantage of it. Really is essentially what the mass or a religious service should be, where I don't sit at home and pray on my own, but where I come together with brothers and sisters. And because we can do that, there's a spirit or an expression, a communal expression. It's why you have liturgical dance. It's why you have liturgical movement. It's why you have liturgical music. It's why you dress up for it. But
a lot of people going to see U2, and Bono himself has said that he believes that when he does it, the greater force, they're gathering together to celebrate as Bono, and that makes him fearful. Yes. And it's U2. Yes. They're not aspiring beyond that to a God force.
Exactly, but I'm not saying that isn't also true. What I'm saying is what people experience there is, and I would look at how young people where young people feel at home and feel loved and feel wanted, and where young people feel free to express themselves. And I think if I'm not looking at that, I have no right to be trying to communicate with young, different or old. And I'm also finding a little of myself in that. I'm not sort of bringing the idea of me sort of trying to bring people to God through music. It could be true, but for the idea of me trying to be trendily interested in music just to bring people to God is not true, and never was true. I was first of all a fan.
By the way, before this interview began, Brian Darcy and I had discussed the cultural sea change signified by the fact that in 1955, Elvis, in his recording Baby Let's Play House, changed the lyric line, "You may get religion," to "You may have a pink Cadillac." So I asked Darcy, who was born in Fermanagh in 1945, attended the Christian Brothers Grammar School in Omagh, St Michael's College in Enniskillen, and who studied scholastic philosophy in UCD, as is evident from this interview, to tell me more about his years growing up as a pop fan.
It would have been, 60s music? Late 50s, early 60s?
Mainly 60s music.
Now, I've interviewed someone like Paul Durkin, who said he discovered Heartbreak Hotel, and then the priest or the bishop or somebody told him this was the devil's music, and the shadows came in, and it was sexual, and you should not be sexual.
They told me that.
Did you have to go through all that stuff?
Yes, very much so. And priests, I was taught by priests in school who kept telling me these things were wrong. And I mean, I remember at home as a young fella in a very small country 2-roomed house in Bellnelec with a tin roof in it. I studied and did all my studying listening to Radio Luxembourg in my ear, right through the 50s and right through the until 63.
But did you have moral problems dealing with the suggestion that rock and roll was the devil's music and that it was too sexual for Irish Catholics to be opening their hearts to?
At the very time that I was saying that, there was a rule in our diocese which said it was a reserved sin to go to a dance that did not end at 12 o'clock. That was the kind of thing we grew up in. But still, we were going to bands, and I had been at school in Oma with fellas like Pat Chesters of the Platinum and Brian Call, Frankie McBride, Ray Moore, Rob Strong. All those guys were fellas that I grew around with, and I said, well, there's nothing wrong with them. Do you know what I mean? And there was nothing wrong with me either. And when I wanted to be a priest, my father said, you will never be a priest. He did not want me to be a priest.
Why?
Because I was too interested in music. He said, no, he said, that doesn't really look at the priest. Said,
at what age were you when you first articulated the desire to be a priest?
It was not I who articulated it first, actually. It was, I went into confessions one night, as was the regular custom at that stage, and the priest, in the very monastery that I'm rector in now, one of the old priests there was a Father Angelo, which was an awful name for any man to have, but they took names like that at that stage. And it looked like Angelus to me, so I presumed somebody had dropped an O or a U or something along the line. And in the middle of that anyway, he just said, quite out of the blue, he said, did you ever think of becoming a priest? And I was about 16 at this stage. And I said, no. And he said, well, I think you should. I said, why? Well, he says, I think you're good enough. I said, well, nobody ever told me that I was good enough to be a priest. Well, he said, come down to me next week, and I said, I can't because I'm playing in the county final, which I was, of Gaelic football. Well, he said, will you come the following week? And I would get up on my bicycle and I cycled the 5 mile, and I saw him the following week, and I did. I would have been basically, I wouldn't have been a rebellious young fella in that sense. But I mean, I was the black sheep of my family at that stage, you know.
Had you lived like a boy of 16 would in relation to sexual experience, drinks, any of that?
Not
in those
drinks,
days?
No, not drink. I suppose
girlfriends?
Girlfriends, but innocent.
In those days, it would be
it was innocent.
And holding
exactly,
hands.
Precisely. Going to school and on the way back from school, and maybe going to dances, and maybe you know, there was no cars or anything like that. But I was going to dances.
Had you been in love or anything as a teenager? I'd imagine.
I wasn't a teenager in love, but I wasn't in love.
Singing Dion's song.
Exactly, and you know, of course you were. And, you know, every young one in the convent school. I mean, you were mad about them. I meet them now. Grandmothers, and it's a chastening experience.
But did you, when you had to make that decision?
Exactly.
But I mean, part of the problem still for a lot of them, we'll obviously deal with it later in more detail, is the question of celibacy, the question of giving up all those girls that you had crushes on. Was that even a consideration back then, or was it not?
Looking back on it now, it really wasn't a consideration. I have got to say that, and it is one of the things that I would object to in my own training, that it didn't become a consideration until much later in life. When probably it would have been too late if I hadn't been lucky enough to have well-adjusted friends, if I hadn't been lucky enough to be at a time where I could go and get myself readjusted by doing refresher courses, by doing group work with people, by being psychologically advanced, and by trying to bring some bloody balance into my life. And I'm talking now in 1980 when I began to do this, and have been doing it very seriously ever since.
That seminal subject of how Brian Darcy needed, circa 1980, to unlearn, as it were, some of the more morally dubious and spiritually corrosive aspects of his religious training, is a subject to which we would return during our final tape. But at this point, Brian wrapped up this part of our chat by focusing again on his image as Father Trendy.
I, at any stage, was never in the church's book trendy. I was never acceptable in the church. It was when I became a parish priest, I was objected to by the Archbishop. He did not want me to become a parish priest.
Why? Not because of what?
Because I was too outspoken. B, I was not loyal to the church. And C, because I seemed to be a populist guy.
Brian Darcy, who became a novice at the Passionist Monastery in Enniskillen in 1962, a year later was transferred to Mount Argos in Dublin, ordained a priest in December 1969, and 3 years later became, he says, the first Irish priest to join the NUJ. So I asked Brian if, back when he started writing his column in the Sunday World, he was bound by, say, church restrictions.
They tried to, but I did not do it. When I was editor of The Cross, it had to go through a censor each month. And a number of them caused great problem. But one was an interview I did with Bernadette Devlin in 1972-73, in which she gave a wonderful explanation of how Christianity had failed and how socialism needed to be tried within the church. And she came out with that immortal phrase that immortal thing. And she proved quite, to my satisfaction at least, that the Catholic Church here in Ireland had almost deliberately set up a situation where priests who might have a rebellious or revolutionary nature were fobbed off into religious orders.
You mean abroad?
And therefore abroad.
Oh, and therefore abroad. Yeah, right.
Whereas because they had brought in a rule actually where unless you had attended a diocesan seminary for 2 years, you couldn't enter Maynooth. Okay. Now that wasn't going to get a bus conductor's son in. It was going to get a middle class fella in. Right. And this is her theory, which I had.
But that's the same kind of hierarchical structure that many find offensive within the church, political or otherwise.
Yes.
And particularly socialists or the left-wing analysts throughout the 60s and 70s.
She maintained, that Irish priests had revolutionised Africa and South America, but had never got a chance to do it at home.
All right.
At this point, Brian Darcy explained to me why, the year before this interview, he hadn't felt it would be right to celebrate in Ireland the 25th anniversary of his ordination. So instead, he went to work for a year in South Africa. A report in the Irish Times had suggested it was because he'd been so disillusioned by revelations of paedophilia in the church. I asked him if that was true.
Was it because you were so upset by all the revelations about Ryan, by the paedophile priest? Smith?
No, not at that stage.
Because that's what the Times suggested, that you told friends there is nothing to celebrate in being part of the priesthood when all this is breaking at the same time.
That's not why, but that is not why I went.
But that's why you didn't celebrate. That's why you didn't feel the urge to celebrate.
When I come back, people still want to celebrate, and I said absolutely under no circumstances, and there was no celebration, not even in my own parish.
But because of that, did you feel so disillusioned?
I felt so disillusioned. I did. I felt so disillusioned, and I said, how would I feel if I had been abused by a priest, or if a family in this area been abused by a priest, and see this fella come in and having a big slap up thing? I mean, that really is
you having a big slap up meal,
a slap up meal, or celebration, or people saying what a good for, or whatever you are, or photographs in the paper of the latest of this thing. I mean, there are times when you must have the decency not to celebrate.
But it wasn't a rejection of the priesthood and saying, I don't see anything to celebrate.
Yes, it was rejection of the priesthood that people perceived. Do you understand what I mean? This triumphalist priesthood. And I was saying, no, I'm not getting part of that. I don't want to be part of it, and I'm not part of it.
But was your own perception being polluted too by all this? Mm-hmm. Your own commitment, your own love, your own faith.
Yes. I've no doubt about that, and still is, Joe. I mean, I'm not saying that there was some magic formula which eradicates this. This is a painful journey.
Yeah, I saw you say that and I was saying this to that it's great to see the systems falling down, but so many people are traumatized by the fall. That it's just we can't deal with it. People can't. A lot of people. My mother can't deal with it.
Yes.
She couldn't deal with the whole. I mean, be it Brendan Smith, be it Casey, and Father Michael Cleary, your friend, the whole three happening together. She's 67 years old, and it's very much taking the whole thing right out of her guts.
Well, I mean, I think they're the people that I feel, and I don't mean that again, I feel desperately sorry for good people like that, because they have given a life to it. They have stood against wayward sons not shouting at them, and possibly husbands shouting at them, and they have taken flack.
That's true.
For a long time. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, I mean, they had at least the idea that right was on their side. Yeah. Now that's gone.
Yeah, which is a hell of a loss.
But I mean, that is hell.
It is hell.
Is there any other
the very certainties you clasp to throughout your life.
Can you think of any better definition of hell than that?
No.
And I think that's what hell will be, as a matter of fact. Right. And all of the things we clung to that thought would see us through, they're a puff of smoke.
Well, how many artists have I interviewed, like Christy Moore and that, who say that the loss of faith in another process led them to clasp so deeply onto Guinness or drugs or whatever, that the loss of that certainty is a pivotal experience in anybody's life. And I would agree with you that the older the person, and I don't mean just my mother, I mean people who have fashioned their souls on a particular set of values for their entire lifetime, to have it suddenly whipped from under them is like...
How do you do it? I mean, what happens after that? I mean,
were you ever abused as a child? Were you ever close to being abused?
Yes, I was, but I mean, that's not for publication.
All right, you were.
Because that sounds like I'm just jumping in a bandwagon.
But why wouldn't you want to go public about it? Even to only say, yes, I was, but I don't want to talk about it any further. It doesn't sound like boasting. It sounds like I know I have compassion for this because I was in there.
Yes, well,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, if you want to run it, but I don't want to head and hunt press out because that's wrong.
I promise you, I will
that's
look.
Not
no,
what it is.
You know, so it's
you're not the first one who said it to me. Many people have said it to me. Like obviously, you're saying things so right that obviously you were. And so I'm not going to deny that. I'm not denying it because of shame, because I have in my own community and I have dealt with it and I have said it.
Right.
So I mean I have said it publicly, in that sense, my own religious community that is.
All right.
But it seems too much like misread because of my history as being seen as a father trendy.
Oh yeah, well that's out of the way in the first questions you answered. You know, no, I'll handle this as delicately. I will not.
It might be just read.
But to me it gives more validity to what you're talking about.
I did, of course, honour that promise to Father Brian Darcy. Next up, we discussed what had been his relatively recent and hugely controversial appearance on a particular Late Late Show, during which Darcy argued in the presence of Cardinal Daly that the Church was largely perceived to be out of date and lacking in compassion.
You said it spot on. Exactly. As in, not that it is, but it's perceived as lacking in compassion, out of date, and
exactly.
The structures, about the structures.
Exactly.
You know?
And I still can't understand why, but obviously it just put words on what people had either been afraid to think or were thinking and couldn't put words on.
Did Cardinal Daly say in any way, tone it down?
No.
It would be best if you didn't. Because what you were also calling for was an open debate.
Absolutely.
You were saying, let us discuss these things in public.
He didn't. And that was what annoyed me. That's why I had to say it, because I had said a few things in the earlier part of the program, which I actually think are more important. That of the arrogance of the Church saying that people who live together have to be living in sin, or the fact that people were, that Church leaders were dismissing anxiety and anger with the Church and putting it down to pedophilia. I was saying I'm maintaining the paedophilia is the excuse people use for a latent anger at the Church anyway because of decades of repressive clericalism.
Yeah.
And I think
in
that's...
the broadest sense.
Yes, and I think that's what has to be looked at. Right. Not just how do we get over paedophilia, but you want to look at how does Father X react when I go and I'm living with a girl in the parish and I look for my child baptized. How does Father X go when he knows that we've been living together for 2 years and we go to him for marriage? How does Father X react when I have made a genuine decision, I've made peace with my former wife, and I'm now in a new relationship with the person that I know can't be blessed formally by a church, but nevertheless I know I'm at peace with my God. How does Father X react when I go up for Holy Communion? True. And I'm looking at how does Father X react with the running of the local school and the appointment of teachers? Now we're getting into nitty-gritty stuff of repressive clericalism that has caused much of this anger that has now found a very legitimate way of expressing itself in anger against paedophiles.
But you can see why the community and society in Ireland has hooked into the paedophile thing.
Oh, sure, and rightly so. I mean, we have to get that out of the way. We have to make sure that we repair the damage, and we have to make sure that you can't say that it's never going to happen again. Because families will tell you that, they've done their best in families. I mean, families have been dealing with this for centuries, and certainly very much so in the last decades.
During this next part of the interview, you may hear a kind of bleed through from a previous recording on the cassette tape, but what Darcy said is way too important to be silenced by a slight technological flaw, especially given that the Church has since censured him publicly, in a sense that to me is highly flawed, theologically speaking. Either way, Darcy at this point told me he'd always tried to undo the notion that guilt and shame are good, and that the only way to get to heaven is to suffer.
And again, I'll use the word perception. It is perception that guilt and suffering and all those things are good.
Yes, I agree, but I've spent my life trying to say that is not true.
All right.
I've spent my life saying it's not. I mean, if a woman comes up to me tomorrow and says I've had a miscarriage, that's how I began the article last night. And for eons I've been doing it. If somebody comes and says my child has died, I'm not going to say it's God's will.
All right.
Flip me. Sure, I don't think it's God's will. When my nephew died, I was ferociously angry with God. And I was saying to my sister, Marie, you have a right to be angry with God about that. Please don't try and say that is God's will. It's not God's will. God doesn't want that. But it doesn't mean that we can't somehow.
So how do you explain it to yourself or to your family?
The only way I can explain it to myself is that evil and suffering and life in general, I don't know the answer to them. All I know is I know enough about God in my life to know that He'll walk with me through it. Now, where He's leading me, I don't know where He's leading me, but I know that it will be that He won't abandon me.
Do you not feel at a moment like that He has abandoned you when the
Yes,
death
of
of a
course you
child
do.
or the death of a young
Absolutely,
person?
but then didn't Jesus on the cross say, my God, why have you forsaken me? So, I mean, it's just a perfectly normal spirituality to have. But
The doubt and the questions are surely part of faith.
Yes. How can you have faith until you have doubted?
All right. When was the moment of deepest crisis for you in terms of maybe coming close to just believing there is not a God?
It happened a few times. It happened a few times in me. Not just one. It would happen a few times. I would say I was dealing with a family, and the fourth member of the family committed suicide.
Right.
And I'd say, this, that's pretty close to despair. I would say...
Like as in, how can God allow this?
I would say that the day the bomb went off in Enniskillen,
All right.
I doubted if there was a God that day.
All right.
So at moments of that it's not personal stuff that makes me denote God.
All right.
So far,
When's the moment when personal stuff made you absolutely? Because somebody told me that I didn't see you with. Was it Jerry Ryan or was it Jerry Ryan?
Yeah.
That you really seem to be close to leaving the church and wanting to have a child and wanting to marry. Are those personal?
I would hope so. I would hope so, Joe. I mean, I would hope that I would still be thinking of those things, and that's not that because I'm wanting to do them, I'm looking to do them, that I'm going to do them.
But is it not a result of the past year where the whole thing seems to have fallen around you?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say it's just a result of the falling in around me. No, I would not. I wouldn't say. I don't think it'd be fair to do that now, because fair to put that on. I think I have to own something myself.
Fair enough.
Do you understand what I mean?
No, but I did see the suggestion that the church's position in terms of celibacy when Thomas was that really upset and disappointed you.
That totally flummoxed me, and still does to this day.
Why? What's so?
Because there's absolutely no reason for compulsory celibacy. It is a mean man-made law that has something to do with property in the Middle Ages and has nothing to do with human development now. It has nothing to do with the first Pope. It had nothing to do with 1,000 years of it. Compulsory celibacy I'm talking about.
I know.
And it has nothing to do with anything today other than a mean little rule about nothing.
But do you hope it will be changed?
Of course it will be changed.
You think it will be?
Of course it will be changed.
Sooner rather than later?
Well, and in Church's terms, sooner it could be in 50 years.
Later during the interview, I asked Father Brian Darcy if there was any truth to the rumour that he was moved out of Mount Argus because he'd gotten involved with a woman. This then led on to us discussing his denial at the time of claims that his friend Father Michael Cleary was the father of Ross Hamilton, one of two sons, and some say a daughter, that Cleary, it now transpires, fathered with his housekeeper Phyllis Hamilton. By the way, the Niall Stokes I refer to in the following quote is the editor of Hot Press.
Okay, I'm going to give you the wildest rumour I heard. If there's any truth to it, you can answer it the way you will. That some of your older parishioners in Mount Argus said you were sent out of the parish because you were involved with a woman.
No.
Now, is that the kind of story? No. Have you heard that?
Well, you hear that every week.
All right.
You hear that every week.
That you were moved because you were involved, and someone else said, this is just older women said it to a young guy who told me only 2 nights ago, that they say, we know why he was moved on. But it did sound like one of these...
No.
That you were involved with, someone said, a woman, and that you were shifted as if that was to kill that. No. Any area of that. There's no truth at all to that rumour. No,
I was totally involved with about 900 women.
Why? Oh, God. Get out of here.
In the parish of Mount Argus. The reason I was changed was because we have terms. And when you're superior, your term comes to an end. And when you're superior, you do not stay on in the same house at the end of your term.
All right.
Because the new superior would find it very difficult, and you would find it very difficult. So it is traditional and it's a very sensible thing.
All right.
That when your term comes, you're moved from that house. Now, we don't have any other house in Dublin.
So there's no skeletons going to come out of the closet after you die?
I wouldn't say that. I don't know about that, but there's no. But there'll be no real skeletons.
Because you see, one of the parts, and I think even Niall Stokes wrote about it there, where he felt, he did say to me that you were discredited when you said that Father Michael Cleary had not had children because he told you that and you believed it. And on the front of your paper there was 12 pages of what seemed to be loving photographs of him with his son. And where does that leave you?
I mean, there was when Ross was in the house and Phyllis was in the house and I was in it very frequently and Mick was in mine and all of them were in mine. Yes, they got on very much. I mean, if you want to take photographs of me, I have photographs by the million of loving photographs of everyone around the place. And I don't know. I'm not knocking Phyllis. I'm not knocking Ross.
Okay.
Well, I let time decide.
But you still.
I still said that what Mick and Phyllis told me at that time.
That it was not
true.
Really?
Yes.
Mick and Phyllis told you that at the time. Would you have a problem accepting it if it was true?
No, not at all. I would be horribly disappointed that he didn't tell me.
Oh, right. But that would be only on a personal,
on a
friendly
personal basis.
level.
No, not at all.
That he hadn't felt it.
I would have had no other problem. I would be horribly disappointed that he didn't tell me or that he told me a lie.
All right, but that's a friend to a friend,
That's
isn't
a
it?
friend
Rather
to a friend.
than
Yes, but it's not. I wouldn't be disappointed at all as Mick Cleary priest. Do you follow what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that priest on the Late Show who was saying he got out and he's married and he's happy. People were very, very sympathetic.
Oh, sure.
To his situation.
Sure.
You know. So when I asked you that question about you being involved with it, I didn't mean, are we going to find out you have 2 children or that?
No.
But the question.
I have no children. I've never slept with anybody, man, woman, or child.
But have you ever fell in love?
Yes.
In a non-sexual, and you had to stop.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
I mean, I've written about it. I've talked about it. I mean, I have. And hopefully will again.
All right, and you hope you would fall in love again?
Hopefully, yeah.
Did you not feel pain because it couldn't be fulfilled? But as far as, I'm not talking sexual, I'm talking about...
Sure, I'm talking about
love.
The love of being wanted and knowing somebody that wants you and is close to you and understands you and all the rest of it. I would find that a good place to be, actually.
That intimacy, that human intimacy.
A good place to be. And certainly you could never go around the life saying... blocking people out in case that happened to you. When it happens,
some priests and nuns have to do that.
Yes.
In order to keep what they perceive to be pure, the relationship with Christ.
Right.
Because you are asked to become bride of Christ or whatever, in that sense.
Yeah, but I don't, yes, you are, in that sense.
And the priests I knew when I was growing up, but a lot of the priests, I have had very good relationships with priests all my life, you know, and lots of friends, and Father Rory down in the Franciscan friary and things like this. But I always got the sense from them that they were emotionally afraid that they could love in the abstract and give in the abstract. I loved Christ, I never doubted that. But there was a part of them that was like, just keep the heart closed.
Exactly. I hope I would never become that. I think I would. I think that would be something that would ask me to leave the priesthood. If that did happen.
Right. Because then you can't really.
You can't be a human being, and you can't be care, and you can't be holistic. You know.
All right. Do you feel finally that as a human being and as a Christian you can be holistic and fully fulfilled with just the relationship with Christ? In the depths of the night and at the end of your life in your dying bed? Or is that a question that must forever...
I can't give you an answer to that, Joe.
All right.
I can't give you an... I hope when I die the answer will be yes. I hope my life wasn't wasted. But I can't answer that other than as a day-to-day act of faith.
I knew right away that last quote had given me a great exit line for the article. So I said to Brian, I'm finished. But I obviously wasn't, because after I heard the tapes, I identified gaps in his story and facts that I wanted him to elaborate upon. So we met again. One of the first things we discussed was Darcy's response to director Louis Lenton's moving drama documentary, Dear Daughter, about the horrific abuse children such as Christine Buckley suffered in the Golden Bridge orphanage at the hands of the Sisters of Mercy, particularly one seemingly psychotic nun. One scene in the TV show Darcy refers to, namely when former residents reenacted childhood activities such as being forced to meet a quota of making 60 sets of rosary beads a day.
All right, one thing that has happened since we last talked is that there's a part of the interview where you very much describe nuns almost in saintly terms, and that image has taken a hell of a bashing with the revelations about Golden Bridge and the kind of the violence performed by a nun, which is incredibly explicit, graphic, and devastating to a lot of people.
Absolutely, and rightly so, and none more so than those nuns who have tried to make a good job of it. I think what I said, and I hope it's what I said the last time, was that the people who have made most strides in finding the church,
they're revolutionising.
They're revolutionising.
I pushed that a little. We do explore that.
And I still think that, because they came from being a baby bashing group of people, if you understand, some of them who are baby bashers, to realise, to moving out into the open, to being leaders in their field. And that I would still stand by that. Now, having said that, I would also say that, as far as I can see, there is no doubt in the world that did take place. And my sermon last Sunday was about it. And my sermon was quite simply this, that when we see evil and when we see sin, we must name it as that. And that was both evil and sinful. And anybody who covered it, anybody who cooperated with it, anybody who did something about it, cooperated in a very evil, cynical sin.
Right.
And furthermore, I would go and say that when we're looking back in the church and talking about the good old days, let's remember that they were not good old days. I lived through them. They were horrifically bad days.
Right.
There were some good people in it, but there were bad days, and that is the best example. I think there is no better image to me, and I said this last Sunday to the people I was preaching to, there is no better image to me of the hypocrisy of some of the things that used to be in Catholicism than we could be rattling round saying rosaries that were made on suffering and child labour.
But isn't that more a systematic abuse of those children than just one nun? Isn't that an institutionalized
Well, that
abuse?
seems to have been, yes.
You know
I think that seems to have
and
been
an institutionalized, accepted abuse of children.
Absolutely, by church, by state, by education authorities, and sadly, as Christine herself quite rightly says, by parents.
So your double response to that as a priest and as a human being when you saw the show?
Well, the response as a man is I cried my eyes out. That thing could happen to children. I really got sick, literally sick, and I mean literally sick in my stomach watching it.
Right. But was it a big shock to you, or had you not heard these rumours?
No.
Maybe not about there, but about other institutions with nuns, as opposed to just priests.
I'd heard, yes, you'd have heard of cruel things that nuns did, but I never imagined that nuns, that any human being, not just nuns, that any human being would put a wee child strapped to a potty till his rectum hung down. I couldn't believe that would happen to anybody.
I know.
You know, I didn't believe, Christ, I didn't believe that happened to you. Call me naive, but I never heard that.
Even within the Holy Orders you had never heard of?
No. Absolutely, I would have to say no. I have met we shouldn't exaggerate, but I certainly met dozens of people who feel maybe that they were in institutions around the place were sexually abused or were lived a horrible regime. But
not that kind of extreme.
Not that horrible regime.
At this point, I told Father Darcy that a former pupil of Sing Street Christian Brothers School in Dublin recently told me that back in the 60s, when he attended that institution, pupils lived in daily terror of being beaten by the brothers, and that you could hear the screams sounding through the corridors nearly all day long.
Sing Street wasn't a boarding school, was it?
Right. I'm not...
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. I wasn't there. No,
so it was a day pupil thing, and it couldn't have happened if it wasn't a boarding pupil. That wasn't going on. There was nobody being... You know, I'm sure people were slapped. Yes, they were slapped, and so was I, and hated it.
But what is this? A slap across the face?
I did get slapped across the head. Yes, by laymen and priests and brothers.
You mean the leather on the wrist?
No, fist. I got fists in the head by laymen and by a priest on one occasion, and by a layman, one that I'll never forget.
Okay, for what? For just saying something out of order?
For talking in class was the one that I got the belt in the head for. I remember it very well. But you know, I'm not saying I met Christian brothers who were very good. I met one horrible bastard of a Christian brother. But I met hundreds of others who were good. Not hundreds of others.
Is he the one who led at you?
And perhaps worse.
But was it systematic or was it once? in your history? Did he seem to? And was it only you?
No, it wasn't me. I wasn't the worst of them. I would have to say. I was a reasonably quiet fella at school.
Okay.
And
he didn't have justification.
There's no justification, but there was no alleged justification for it in me, and I felt very badly about that because I always tried to do my best, and I always felt very unfairly done by.
This is before you decided to become a priest?
Oh, miles before.
Yeah, when you were a kid.
Right up until miles before I decided to become a priest. As I said, it was a late enough thing for me.
Was this a layman or a priest?
Well, I would say the first one was a brother, Christian brother. The second one was, the second biggest beating I ever got was a layman, who's now dead actually, but who's also a man, strange enough, who gave me a great love and respect for English. Which is a strange mixture, the irony of it, you know. And there was one in St Michael's College. There was only one priest that I would say was, to me, a man that if I met him now, I would still shiver.
Would you?
I would.
Because he was abusing.
Just because he was, and more still, tongue.
Oh, public
psychological terror.
Okay, like intimidating.
Intimidating,
self-confidence.
making you feel like a gobshite.
Why though? Your intelligence and you're stupid.
Just that was, because, I don't think anybody, I'm always very careful now. Maybe that you asked me a question, why am I loyal to people? No, I think that's part of it. I tend to believe people are good until they're proven bad. I think as I grew up, I think I was presumed bad until I was proven good in much of the education system. That was the way it was. There were outstanding exceptions to that, and I remember them too. There were outstanding exceptions to that.
But you did encounter evil, and you encountered evil in the guise of God, which it can be very confusing for young people.
I did. There's no question about that. But I also encountered goodness, and I think that's what I was trying to. I wouldn't deny one, but nor would I deny the other either.
Because you did say to me, and it's in the interview, that you hadn't even considered becoming a priest until Father Angelo spoke to you when you were 15 or 16.
That's right.
So you would hardly consider that when you'd had the other experiences with brothers or with whoever.
That's right. I suppose it's no wonder I didn't sort of think about it at all. And I didn't think I was good enough, to be honest with you. And I think that was part of the stuff.
Good as in goodness.
Goodness, yes, as in goodness. Or not in intelligence, as in goodness. I didn't think I was good enough to be a priest.
Here, once again, off the record and off tape, Father Brian Darcy elaborated on the sexual abuse he'd suffered, and that also I now suggested could easily have turned him against the priesthood, if not against God. Darcy said he didn't blame God. I then put to him a theory as propounded by Sigmund Freud.
Now, one sees the reading that a lot of that, whether it is that nun or a priest, that a lot of it is thwarted self-denial in terms of sexuality. Do you buy that kind of Freudian line?
I wouldn't know enough about it. I think it's certainly a very plausible thing. It may well be. I think what has to be looked at in the context of all of this is that very frequently religious life and very frequently systems of training people in religion were themselves of very doubtful origin. And I think that many of us in vocation discovered that getting through a system was an endurance test rather than a blossoming test. And that we have had to work very hard since to regain our humanity. That the system at that time was a brainwashing system of regular exercises, exercises. And that, if the guy was a good religious, if you could actually be in the choir when you're supposed to be in the choir, fast when you're supposed to fast, keep all these external rules. Right. And that goodness, individual anything was not beaten out of you, but driven out of you. Right. Was driven out of you by penance, by endurance, by humiliation, by voluntary humiliation. And that system always left itself open to letting psychotics through and driving good people out.
Or helping psychotics develop.
Well, perhaps.
You know what I mean? Helping psychosis develop.
I would probably...
That was Freud's argument, that it kind of is the frustrated, life-affirming sexuality at that level turned in on itself and turned around.
Yes, I'm not a psychologist and I don't want to go on and say about it, but it's a plausible theory. It certainly is a plausible theory. What I am saying is that the system, the structure around not society structure as well as religion structure, but certainly in the kind of training that I got pre-Vatican Council was, by modern standards, not only doubtful, but damaging, but positive, but definitively damaging.
Was it life-denying?
Oh, absolutely life-denying. Absolutely life-denying.
See, because then you can see where a lot of the resonances come out of
yes,
that afterwards.
and one has to work. I have to work, and other good people have come through it. And the American,
to reclaim yourself.
Yes, I've said on many occasions, I mean it, that some of the most hurt people in this church are priests.
Themselves.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. That systems and theologies and rules and regulations knocked every spark of individualism and humanity out of it.
How can you still believe in a system that is
I don't believe in that
corroded
system.
at a core level?
I don't believe in that system. That's the point. That's the very system I'm trying to change.
Upend.
Yeah.
Right, because
I
the way you're describing it, it's corroded and polluted at a core central level.
That system was, but I don't think it has anything to do. I hope I made a distinction. Maybe I didn't in your interview, but I know I've made a distinction in other interviews, and that's what I'm getting at. There's a huge distinction between religion and spirituality.
Wow. Yeah. Well, we talk mostly about institutionalized religion.
Yes.
And Catholicism of a particular nature and set in a particular time. And that comes across as corroded to a great degree.
That system has to be. And why would there have been need of a Vatican Council? I mean, John the 23rd was a wonderful, wonderful man, because he overcame some of the greatest tyrants and tyrannies to have that. It is most certainly a work of the Spirit, because nothing but the Spirit could have done it.
Finally, I asked Father Brian Darcy to elaborate on that process of re-education spiritually that he himself had gone through circa 1980, spurred on by what seemed to me to be a crisis in terms of sexuality, celibacy in particular, and having fallen in love.
What does that mean? Counselling and therapy?
Not so much therapy, no, but most certainly counselling. Yes, most certainly counselling, and most certainly time to reflect. And but for me, it was done mainly by initially by being with people, sometimes other religious, sometimes lay people, and working through what our image of God and image of church was, and unlearning the one I had, and trying to find out another goodness, another God, another goodness within myself, and being reaffirmed, very much reaffirmed, by what I had read, and by going to lectures and going to talks, and by then sitting back and talking with the spiritual director, as I've always done, and still do to this day, and talking occasionally with a counsellor.
But how did it relate to the question of sexuality and celibacy?
Oh, that would be the main one, because you suddenly became aware of life within you. And that celibacy was not a denial of sexuality, but a developing of your sexuality in a loving way and in a different, holistic way, but not necessarily a genital way.
Right. So you had to be almost re-educated.
Yeah, not almost. I had to be
re-educated.
Yeah.
Do all priests
and relearn
and nuns have to step back from themselves at one point?
And I think you will find that people that priests and nuns that are approachable and holistic and good and human have had to do it, and those who have not done it are very obvious too.
But how do you? And are you at terms with that now? Did the whole process? You said I still am. That's still a continuous
That
process.
hopefully will continue to the day I die. I hope.
Right, but how do you deal with those kind of drives and desires? Particularly, you do touch on the fact that you had fallen in love with a woman. How do you deal with those without them being manifest? Does it turn you into yourself?
No, well, it did. It for a year or two, yes, it did turn me into myself, I would have to say, and made me very protective of myself and very unsure of myself. But I hopefully I remained a reasonably good human being during those times.
But your whole desire and inclination must have been to express that as a human being, if you can remove that from being a priest, and you had to say
no.
Yeah. And that was like to turn your skin around.
Maybe I don't know. I don't know. I just say I'm only judging it by I only have one experience.
Your own. Yeah.
And that was not by expression.
Not
by genital expression or making love or lying with somebody. If somebody who had expressed that way may feel what I did was turning it totally around. Do you understand? I mean, I've only my own expression of that. I don't know. You could be. I don't know.
But it's a core question for people who are considering going into holy orders.
It is.
Not just the kind of sexual act, but what if I fall in love and need humanly to express that in physical shape?
Well, you can't. You can express
some priests have left the church because they had to do this.
Exactly. I think, you see, once you have compulsory celibacy, you have that. I don't agree with compulsory celibacy. I never have agreed with compulsory celibacy. I think there are people who have the gift of celibacy in life. And they're not all priests, by the way.
Is there any element to that story, if you fall in love with a woman or a priest falls in love with a woman, that it could be seen as exploiting the woman, leading her down a path that leads nowhere and ultimately hurting her?
That is. It's always a huge danger. It is always a huge danger. Both of them are hurt. I wouldn't say it's just
both. Okay.
I think both of them are hurt.
Right.
I think inevitably both are hurt.
So both are hurt, but I have heard some women on the radio, maybe it was Joe Duffy or Jerry Ryan, saying that they were led into that situation and they wish the priest had the decency in advance to say, don't feel for me, don't care for me, fall in love with me.
I sympathise greatly with that. But then, I don't know how you can do that.
Do you run a mile if you see that developing at this stage?
I hope not. No, I don't think I would run a mile.
Would you not?
No, I don't think I'd run a mile because I think that's suppression and running, and that's very damaging and denial. I don't run a mile. No.
Okay.
I just, I try and live with the limitations of it. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not. I hope I'm making sense to you.
It makes sense to me, but I think it's very important for people, because there are still people...
So there's no easy answer to it. I haven't it wrapped up.
Finding easy answers.
No, I haven't it wrapped up, and I don't know, and I'm not sure that I won't make mistakes in the future.
Right.
And I think that's the risk. If I decide, I can have two choices. I can decide to risk being a holistic and let that lead me where it is, or I can decide to make celibacy the main issue of my life. Therefore, I think that defeats everything. If celibacy becomes the main issue of my life, then I have lost priesthood.
Yeah, no, then you're almost reduced to a gently fixated person.
Exactly. An overgrown schoolboy. An overgrown schoolboy.
Right. But you also did say, when I asked you, did you think of leaving the priesthood to get married and have children, you said you have thought of it, and it may happen, but it's not something you've decided you want to do.
That's right.
You're open to the potential.
Well, I don't really. I mean, how else can I be? I mean, I at this moment intend to remain a priest, right? But I can't say for certain that is where God wants me and is going to lead me. I can honestly say in my life that God may lead me somewhere else.
Right. And maybe you could better fulfill yourself.
Precisely. It's not so much. I think you see.
Better fulfill your faith.
Fulfill God's will.
Yeah.
But the whole point of anybody in any existence in life is finding out what God wants of me and having the strength to follow it. At this moment, I'm fairly convinced, as convinced as anybody humanly can be, that He wants me to be a priest in this time. Right. I don't know that God may say, you've done enough damage, Darcy, move on somewhere else.
Hi, Joe Jackson here again. I thank you for listening to this edition of the Joe Jackson Interviews podcast. And don't forget, if you want to access the full tapes for personal or professional use, contact me via my website, joejacksoninterviewer.com.